Formal welcome. Thank you to everybody who is joining today's event, The Key to Secure Electric Vehicle Charging. This event today is part of a virtual event series that DigiCert is doing. And, you know, electric vehicle right now and the security of electric vehicle charging stations is a topic that is very on the forefront of discussions throughout the industry. There are a lot of groups that are assembling around the topic of getting the PKI right and making sure that as the industry moves forward with the PKI, that the design, the architecture, the operations, the governance is done in the right way. And Oscar and I are involved in many of those discussions. PKI typically isn't a hot topic in any industry until security becomes a big problem, and security spans multi-stakeholders and multi-organizations and multi-regions, global. And the electric vehicle charging station industry is in that state right now. And Oscar and I today are going to be talking about some of the things that we're seeing, what's going on with the PKI, opportunities where we see for improvement. And also we'll be talking about kind of a desired end state where based on the experience that Oscar and I have had in other critical infrastructure industries where we see things going. Just by way of introduction, my name is Mike Nelson. I'm the Vice President of IoT Security. My team works to deploy global PKI solutions in all critical infrastructure industries. We have a very robust team of professionals who help our customers. Those can be consortiums within an industry or individual manufacturers or organizations deploying PKI. But we are very proud of the global footprint that we have. DigiCert is the largest certificate authority globally, and we are proud of that reputation. I'm joined today by a good friend and colleague, Oscar Marcia. Oscar, it's so great to have you on with us tonight.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. Oscar is the president of Ionti. Ionti is a close partner to DigiCert, and Oscar is the president. And in that role, Oscar has worked with many critical infrastructure industries to help design, implement, and operationalize their PKI. Some of those of note are the cable industry. Probably about 20 years ago, Oscar, that's kind of a shot in the dark, but about 20 years ago, I know you architected that solution, and that PKI today is still ongoing. It's issued over 500 million certificates without any issue. And Oscar was the mastermind behind that. And he did great work there. He has also done the same work in the aviation industry, emergency services, consumer. He is a very close partner of DigiCert because I tell people all the time, he is probably the best PKI mind I have ever met. And it's an honor to have you on with me today, Oscar. So thank you for joining.
Well, thank you, Mike, for that glowing introduction. And I'm happy to be here. It's very early in the morning where I'm at on the East Coast, but I can't think of a better topic to stay up late and kind of be on. So excited about the opportunity to speak to this group. And also, it's a timely conversation. You and I have had this conversation many times, and I think it's I think our combined experience and our combined expertise and what we are seeing with our current customers, just kind of leads me to believe that this is a very hot topic. And again, happy to be here and joining you on this.
Awesome, thank you. Just to reemphasize the partnership. The reason I want to do this is just to lay the credentials on the table that Ionti and DigiCert have worked in multiple critical infrastructure industries to stand up global PKIs. And our unique blend of robust technology from DigiCert and the operational and the governance expertise that Oscar and his team bring to the table really creates a unique blend. This next slide really highlights and gives an overview of the work that we have done together. And you can see here that it spans many different industries, healthcare, cable, many different, transportation and automotive, and also in aviation, telco, emergency services, smart home, and energy. And we're proud of the work that we've done. an emerging theme that we have seen, or a trend that we have seen recently, is, I think when Oscar designed the cable labs, PKI 20 years ago, Oscar, you probably weren't thinking about how TVs and cable modems would need to connect outside of that ecosystem. But today we're seeing a lot of cross-domain connection and the need for cross-domain communication. For example, I'm a type 1 diabetic. My car, in a matter of years, will be able to communicate with a wearable continuous glucose monitor that I'm wearing. And when my blood sugar goes low, it will pull over, or it'll tell me to get sugar, right? I mean, medical is communicating with transportation. What we're seeing in the electric vehicle space, electric vehicle manufacturer, the charging station manufacturers, the OEMs are needing to communicate with energy, with utilities. And there's a lot of cross-domain connections and communications that we are seeing emerge, where PKI really is so good at that type of facilitating that type of cross-domain security, to make sure that those connections are done and in a secure way. And EV is really on the forefront of that because of the complexity, the multi-domain stakeholders that are involved in the industry, and we're going to be talking a little bit about that. But just want to kind of lay this out before we dive into it, just to show that we really have done a lot of work in a lot of different industries that allow us to look at what's going on in the electric vehicle space through a unique lens, and really to say, there are really good things going on, but here are some areas that need to be watched, and we need to make sure that the industry does the right thing. And that's one of our takeaway messages today, is it's so important to get the PKI right. So here's an agenda. Just want to throw this out here really quickly. I've already talked about DigiCert and Ianti. We're going to dive into why PKI is the right security solution for electric vehicle charging. We're going to get into the journey of PKI, where it started, how it's evolved, and where it needs to go from here. We're then going to talk about an evaluation that Oscar, that Ianti and DigiCert did of some of the standards in the electric vehicle charging space, ISO 15118. We're going to talk a little bit about what we found in that. And then we're going to end kind of a kumbaya moment of where we see this going, what needs to happen to bring it together and make sure that the PKI that's being stood up is going to work globally for the industry. Jumping into rules of engagement, we really want your participation. For those of you, we've all used Zoom a lot in the last year. There's a Q&A button on the tab bar in Zoom. Please use that. If you have questions throughout our presentation, whichever one of us is not talking, we'll do our best to field those. We'll interrupt, we'll answer those questions as best we can. So please don't be shy. We're also going to be doing some live polling. The answers to those will be de-identified, so you don't need to worry about your name or your company's name being shared on those. We're just going to share general percentages, and we want your involvement on that. So please, when those polls pop up, click and let us know what you're thinking. And then finally, as you register, DigiCert likes to thank people for participating. One of the things that we are doing is we're offering a free 2-month trial. We're going to talk a little bit at the end about some of the technology that we've built that really tailors to the electric vehicle charging station use cases that are needing PKI right now. And we're doing some free offerings around free support, so you can get in, you can test it, you can test workflows. And then we're also doing a free root and ICA, which is a great no-cost implementation for you. So we really want you to start testing it out, trying it with our help and expertise. So we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, just in conclusion, but just wanted to say thank you for jumping on. All right, Oscar, we've got all that out of the way. Let's jump in now and talk about why PKI is the right solution for the electric vehicle industry. As Oscar and I consult with a lot of different organizations, there are typically a handful of characteristics that are going on that lead industries to say, we need PKI. Connectivity is on the rise. As everybody knows, there are electric vehicle charging stations popping up around the globe. Everybody's office, if you don't have them already, you're going to have them soon. Charging stations are popping up everywhere. And those are connected devices that require security. There's a lot of communication going back and forth to that charging station, and it's connecting to other things like vehicles. Those connections need to be secured. The complexity of the environment, the more complex the connection, the more complex the multitude of stakeholders, the complexity of regulatory burden, whatever it is, the more complexity or complex an industry is, PKI really excels in those complex environments. And then finally, as threats are emerging, that typically encourages and lights fires under industries to start paying more attention to security. And so we see threats being another common driver to get industries moving towards PKI. And in the electric vehicle space, we are seeing more and more security researchers publishing papers about the known vulnerabilities, lack of encryption, lack of authentication in certain aspects of the electric vehicle. And so we are seeing more security researchers pay attention to this. And so we believe that the threats are becoming more known. And with the threats going up, the number of devices going up, it's creating what we believe to be a potential perfect storm. And that's why it's really important for the industry to pay attention and start getting this right. All right, let's jump into the first polling question. We're just going to test everybody here. These are kind of maturity. The first couple of questions are about the maturity of the industry. Is your organization currently using PKI for electric vehicle charging? And as you're answering that, I'll just say, we have representatives today. I looked through the list really quickly, but from both OEMs, from electric vehicle charging stations. And so I think we have a good, diverse group. So please, if you guys will, let's see, if you guys can please respond to the polling question. To our AV team, I am not seeing the results being published. It's actually giving me the opportunity to vote. Oscar, are you seeing the same thing, or are you seeing the answers coming in?
I see the question.
You see the question, but do you see the answers coming in?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to give our AV team a minute to try to fix that. I'm going to go ahead and close that out. What I can share with you is in the event that we conducted earlier today, it was around 75% of participants said that they had not begun implementation. There we go. Okay, we did have responses. They were hiding it from me. Perfect. So it looks like 100% of participants said no. So, we do believe that there are a handful of organizations out there that are testing and are trying and are doing things with PKI. Thank you to our AV team for getting that going. But the industry, to emphasize my last point, is behind the game on this. And that's why we believe PKI really is becoming a hot topic. All right, let's jump to the next question. So if you are 100% no, let's ask the next question. If you can launch poll question number 2, please. Does your organization have plans to use PKI for EV charging? Do you in the next 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5 years, or 5+? Please answer accordingly. Give it just a minute. I'm not seeing the results come in, but I trust that they are. All right, if we could end that and please share the results. Perfect. This is consistent with what we saw earlier. So 57% of today's attendees indicated that in the next 1 to 2 years, they would begin using PKI. We had a little bit higher percentage on our event earlier today, but that's consistent. And that's actually also really encouraging to see that organizations are beginning to implement that. If you're doing it in the next 1 to 2 years, it means you're probably already in the design, the architecture, you're looking at how to deploy. And so I'm encouraged. Oscar, any thoughts on that, what we've seen?
I think, as you mentioned, that it is the trend, not only what we saw in the earlier event, but also what we're hearing from our customers. We know that industry is moving to electric vehicles. You hear big announcements from OEMs. We know that that it is a near-term trend. They're wanting to be full, committed to electric vehicles in 2030, 2040. This is just around the corner when you're thinking in that amount of time. As you said, it takes a while to get the governance documentation in place. So 1 to 2 years is right there. It's what we've been hearing in our events and what we've been hearing with our customers.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. So congratulations, everybody, for answering that right. All right, so let's keep moving. A couple other characteristics of things that we see in industries that are adopting PKI. As I said, cyber threats are on the rise. There are multiple industry stakeholders. This is an interesting one, and the reason why this is a common characteristic for PKI is because the ability to create trust amongst the multi-stakeholders through the use of shared routes. Electric vehicle charging industry has a plethora of stakeholders. You have OEMs, the car manufacturers. You have the charging station manufacturers. You have the different utility providers who are helping to distribute and manage the energy that's going to and from the vehicle. You have consumers in this ecosystem and their financial data. You have security vendors who are providing security solutions, and you also have regulators who I believe are going to continue to play more and more of a role in this space. It's important to make sure that all of these stakeholders, whether they're solution providers or regulators, really understand and know that there is trust that's established amongst them. And PKI is a great way of doing that. Going back to this, ecosystems or industries where the connection and the trust is critical. So knowing that there's trust, not just in the transaction, so the data that's being shared, but also knowing that whatever's connecting into your device can be trusted. And the use of digital certificates and PKI is a great solution for helping to ensure and establish that trust. And finally, seamless interoperability. Seamless interoperability is a really important ingredient. It's something that, clearly consumers, when they pull up to a charging station, they want a seamless and an easy experience. They don't want lag in their connections. They don't want to have to re-enter credentials for payment information. They want a seamless connection and an automated experience. And PKI helps enable that automated, seamless interoperability and secure connection. We talk about PKI a lot at DigiCert, as you guys can imagine. It's really interesting to me. A very common part of our discussion. Usually, just making sure my connection. A little lag there.
You're back on.
But it's very common for organizations to come to us and think that the PKI is all about the technology. And I use this definition a lot. I tell people it's much more than the technology. PKI is a comprehensive framework that contains the set of roles, policies, procedures needed to manage, distribute, create, store, use, revoke digital certificates. It's much more than just the routes and the ICAs and the end entity certificates and the HSMs. It's those policies, procedures, and that's where we see industries really struggle, is getting those aspects right. And Oscar's going to talk about that in a little bit. But I just want to lay that as a foundation that it's much more than just standing up technology. It's how do you operationalize? How do you govern? How do you manage it in a way that scales and is seamless? And then finally, this slide is really the magic of interoperability and seamless, secure communication. Roots of trust are the way you establish that trust, the way you establish that shared trust across multi-stakeholders. And the reason for that is because at the top of this, you see the shared root CAs. And this is just a hypothetical architecture. There could be a single root or there could be multiple roots. But anything that is signed by that trusted shared root inherits the trust. And that chain of trust, as you move down, all the ICAs, as long as they are signed by a trusted root, inherit that trust. And anything that's connecting to that, or anything that that ICA signs, so the identity certificates that come under there, inherit that same chain of trust. The chain of trust is so important in what we're talking about because that's how the trust is established. And that's where the interoperability and that's where the seamless communication happens, is through those roots. And I'm not saying that a multi-root system is where electric vehicle charging stations are going, although it appears to be that way. And Oscar's going to talk a little bit about that. We see industries that have multi-roots, and we also see industries like aviation, Cable Labs, the one that Oscar architected. That's a single root system, and those work. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But roots of trust is really the magic. It's where that trust, it's where that seamless interoperability, it's how you solve the challenge of complexity. But it's also important to get your architecture right. Oscar, you want to talk a little bit about that, and we'll kick it over to you and we can move into the next phase of our presentation.
Sure, thank you, Mike. Yeah, and I think one of the things that people forget is that at the root level, that is your anchor, that is your trust anchor. That is what you're trying to get to when you validate your certificates. And to set up a root and to make it trusted, it all depends on the governance, on how it was created, how it's going to be maintained, how was it signed, is that auditable? And so all of that is how you develop trust within a root system. Underneath that, through your ICAs and entities, you have technical controls, you have revocation lists, you have OCSP responders, and so you can get certificate status. And so there's a technical component to that. But at the trust level of the root, it's based primarily on the governance. And you as a reliant party, you're either going to trust it or not.
That's right. Awesome. Let's do a quick polling question number 3. I want to ask I want to ask everybody, what role do PKI certificates, or what role can PKI certificates play in electric vehicle charging? Is it payment integrity, roaming authentication, secure distribution of energy, or all the above? We'll give everybody a minute to answer. Oh, answers are coming in quickly, and I can see them. Thank you, AV team. Awesome. Let's wrap up the poll. There's still answers coming in, so I'm sorry if you didn't get your answer in, but 100%. Well done, everybody. You passed the quiz here. 100% of attendees responded all the above, and that's right. And there's more than what we listed there. As electric vehicle charging stations begin their implementation of security and PKI, the use cases will grow. But the first one is authentication. Public key infrastructure and the use of authentication certificates is a great starting point. And that's mutual authentication of anything connecting into the charging station. So that can be the vehicle, the network, service provider, or a charging station to another charging station. The next aspect is encryption. And this is ensuring that any confidential data, financial or personal data about the consumer, is handled in a confidential way, and encryption is used. The final security solution that PKI provides in this ecosystem is around integrity. And in that last question, we talked about integrity of transactions. So when a consumer goes to the charging station, They pay for their charge, they get a receipt. How do you know that there's integrity around that transaction? Digital signatures and the use of PKI can be used to do that. So I hope that this portion of our presentation has helped you guys see why PKI is such a good fit for this ecosystem, for this industry, and why it's getting so much attention right now. I'm now going to kick it over to Oscar, and he's going to talk through the journey of PKI and how we got to where we are today.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, and so when we looked at the landscape for electric vehicle charging, and as Mike mentioned earlier, we've been doing this for over 20 years, and we've been working together in providing PKI implementations for critical infrastructures, and transportation falls into that category. We were asked in 2018, 2019 timeframe to kind of look at the landscape of electric vehicle charging, PKI in particular. And so, you know, we took a strong look at the standard, the ISO 15118-2, which was developed in 2014, kind of setting up the secure connection between the vehicle and charging stations. And at that time, you know, we not only just took a look at the standards, but we also included some of the early guidelines from industry that were helping out the implementers of the -2 type in PKI implementations, and DDE is one that is listed there. There are some reference certificate policies that were out there that we reviewed. And so we kind of took at that early look and saw, well, you know, I'll explain a little bit in coming slides what the actual results were of that. But what we started seeing in that trend, as we saw, you know, standard space PKI kind of requirements within a standard for the ecosystem, some guidelines. And then in 2020, there is a ISO 15118-20 that is soon to be published. That's kind of updating the old, but it's more than just updating. There's additional features that are added. Again, you think back to 2014 to 2020, the amount of evolution that has gone on in security alone warrants some of the changes that you'll see being published in the -20 spec. And then we started seeing that that started moving into kind of a harmonization of PKI, kind of moving it out of the standards group, but also into protocol neutral designs, into ecosystems, and the PKIs that we have implemented, the ones that have been successful, do create a consortium or a representative group that kind of sets about creating that governance, the certificate policies, the practice statements, the agreements that are needed at the governance level, and then also harmonizing the hardware, the software, and then the operational components that are needed. And so we were happy to see that, because our experience told us that that's the ones that we had worked with that have been successful, that's what they were doing. And so in 2022, we're involved in working with SAE in their EV charging PKI. There's a collaborative research project going on there, and that's starting to come to fruition in terms of harmonizing PKI across the multiple domains, the OEMs, charging stations, payment systems, mobility operators, utilities. And so we hope that trend continues. We see Charin, a group within Europe, kind of following the same trend, becoming kind of that lead consortium for the implementation, particularly to the ISO specs. And we're very encouraged that we're seeing the right trends. The PKI requirements being in a standards will only get you so far, because standards want to do technology, right? And so they really do well in the technology requirements. But as Mike has mentioned, governance and operations of the PKI are also very important. And to get it right, you have to get all the pieces right. And we're hoping that trend continues into kind of more global harmonization efforts, consortiums, especially in the EV space, because it is a very rich multi-domain system, and one of the ones that we see that are coming out with that. And so we're hoping that the train continues, and we want to be part of that story. So next slide. Yeah, thank you, Mike. So here, just kind of elaborating a little bit more and what we're seeing. And typically what we know of critical infrastructures, they were pretty much siloed. When you talk about either in emergency services or in just regular OEM vehicle manufacturers, every major vehicle manufacturer has PKI embedded in their vehicles, and they use it for diagnostics, they use it for messaging, they use it for code updates, and so that's all been there. But traditionally, the manufacturers kind of tend to want to control everything that is within their vehicles, and so they have their own PKIs, and they're kind of what we call siloed, enterprise type PKIs. But now you're wanting to take advantage of these new services that are allowed through kind of internet connections for payments, for authentication across domains. And so these electric vehicles now want to talk to a charging station. Charging stations want to talk to cloud providers of payment, mobility operators, and they all want to talk to the utilities. And so together, as these systems before were kind of in separate routes, and you kind of see a representation of that. You see some OEM PKIs. You see the ISO kind of 15018 would play in that charge point operator role there. That's where those standards fall. And then you would see also some payment systems that everybody's used to out there. They have their own mechanisms, and a lot of them are using PKI. And so, how do you bring that all together, and how do you harmonize that? And they always go back to what Mike said. How do you get it right? How do you get PKI right? And you get it right by making sure that all the components are available. And so, whether it's a single rooted system or a multi-rooted system, I think it's asking asking the question as to why. Why do you need the multiple routes, or can you work with just a single route? There are pros and cons to both. If one multi-route system doesn't fit all, so it's very important to kind of understand the playing field, the areas, and when you're talking about multi-domains, there's a lot that has to be considered there when considering the initial architecture.
Oscar, I'm glad you talked on that, because there's a question about the pros and cons of multi and single. I think a really interesting discussion is maybe some of the complexity around single and the additional requirements that are required when you have when you have a multi-route architecture. Maybe you can talk to, there seems to be a couple questions, there are a couple questions about the pros and cons, but I do think that that's an interesting component and a really important consideration as you decide to go down a multi-route architecture.
So yeah, and we work with global critical infrastructures, and there's really, you would think the easy solution or the easy answer would be to say, oh, you're global, you're multi-regional, multi-route, right? So it just kind of, it seems to go that way, but it's not. We work in the aviation industry under the Aeromax standard, and their system is flexible enough to allow for multi-routes, but they use a single route, and it just works well that way. And the pros and cons are that, in a multi-route system, you do get that regional diversity. So sometimes privacy laws or just, certain countries want the routes to be housed in their backyard, right? It must be in country. So we call those kind of in-country solutions. And the main reason when we talk to, governments or regions, it's mainly because they think they want that control, that if they have the route, they have the control of their PKI. The cons are that it's very difficult to get multi-routes to be at the same level, right? It requires a lot of auditing. It requires a lot of coordination. And so if you need a high assurance system, it's very difficult to achieve that. You know, one of the ones that we know that is operating at that level is the Federal Bridge from the U.S. Right. And that is a highly audited, you know, very complex system, and it really, in fact, it's overburdened the system that it's only by invitation now that you can get into be a bridge CA, because the government itself even can't keep up with all the auditing capabilities. From a single route, you get that automatic. If you're operating at a high level of assurance, it is operating at a high level of assurance. There's no other thing to compare it to. You also get that instant interoperability, that all identity certificates chain up to the same single route. You're going to maintain that route offline, whether it's multiple routes or one route. And so really, in the end, your routes are only there to issue the next tier, that intermediate certificate tier. And that's where really the policies and the controls happen. And I think we've been successful at working with infrastructures that want multi-routes, and we go in there and we ask the whys, right? Why do you think you need it? Why do you think you want that control? And even working with the state governments that think they need it in their backyard, once we've had the conversations and show them the different implementations, some of them relinquish that and go to the single route, because what they're really after is that high assurance, trusted anchor, right? Yeah. And so, you know, there we can show implementations where multi-route did make sense, right? And again, we can show. So it is important to understand the whys. There are definite pros and cons, and it doesn't really, whether you're global, whether you're high volume, low volume, those are, you would think that those would lead to helping you figure out where you want one route or multi-routes, but they're just different, and it's each ecosystem is a custom kind of design. And so asking the whys, getting it right, really understanding what you are after for that ecosystem, and having the stakeholders really represented in that ecosystem is very important.
Well said, Oscar. Well, let's gauge the audience on this question. If we can launch poll question number 4. What CA route hierarchy do you think is best for electric vehicle charging? Single or multi? Please cast your vote. Ooh. Give it a couple more seconds. Give you a minute to text your colleagues and see what they think. Good. Okay, let's, yeah, that's interesting. So 55%, if we could stop and share the results, 55% of our audience today feels like multi-route, and 45% feels single route. I would love to go through and ask and engage with each of you on that. But the truth is, both can work, as Oscar pointed out. Both can work. It just needs to be done thoughtful and methodically to make sure you do it right and you're getting the right architecture. Any other thoughts on that, Oscar? I think you've already articulated that, but anything else you'd add?
I think it's very interesting. I think in the earlier event, it was a little higher on the multi-route, right. But yeah, as you mentioned, both solutions work. Right? It is just getting it right, getting the type of trust anchor that is needed, and again, understanding the requirements that the ecosystem thinks it needs, laying out how PKI can meet those requirements, and then working through with the stakeholders and the participants and even state governments as to what are the real requirements we're after. And we're always after the best PKI solution, and getting it right, and getting it right from the beginning is very important for us.
Yep, exactly. Perfect. Well, now we're going to jump into the assessment that DigiCert and Ianti did around ISO 15118 and the standard there. Oscar, you want to take it away here?
Sure. So as we saw on the previous slide, and as we saw in the polling questions, you could end up with a multi kind of PKI multi-rooted system. And then when we look at the standards, the ISO 15018, we know that it also is flexible enough that allows the system to be multi-rooted. And so when you do that, and when you're asked to evaluate that, you want to have a kind of a criteria that works, that you can evaluate the different solutions to kind of, to the same level. And so we, over the years, have developed this kind of just set of criteria in terms of looking at a PKI, and starting on the left side from undeveloped, meaning that there just doesn't exist any capabilities for a particular component. And then working across to the right, where you could have some basic capabilities. There might be some documentation. 3, where there's actually some formal requirements. 4, where everything is well set up, and you're kind of in a hybrid mode between manual and automated. And then specialized just means fully automated. And as you can see, that if we work from no existing capabilities to a fully automated, what we're doing is kind of getting the people out of the way, right? Once we have the requirements defined, and we can get into a fully automated system, when they're well maintained and well run, that is the best kind of security implementation. So we look at all these things, and we look across the capabilities, the processes, procedures, the roles, the integrations, and then the capability of the analytics, what is there to kind of review on a periodic basis how your PKI is operating. So when we look at any PKI, this is kind of the criteria, and you'll see as we show the next slides in terms of what we achieved on the ISO standards. So taking that kind of criteria in mind, and taking what we do at Ianti, over the years, we have developed this kind of 360 view of a PKI, because there's just so much going on. There's so many components, and we kind of divided up into these major, governance, technology, and operations. And within each, they have, subcategories that are just as important, right? The certificate policies, practice statements, audit policies under the governance. On the technology, that's your hardware, your software. That is the physical security, the infrastructure for revocation processing. And so that's our kind of the technology piece. And then on the operations, it's the identity vetting of the subscribers, and when they're coming in. It's also delivering the credentials, making sure that they're being used correctly. And then in the end, the revocation process, if there needs to be a revocation. And so when we look at that, and we took that methodology and the criteria that you saw before, we applied that to the ISO 15018-2 review that we did in 2019. And what we saw, and what we figured out, what we do is we take all of that, all of those subcomponents have elements underneath. And so we look at each individual one. And we generally do this so that when we design a PKI, we don't miss anything. Because you can have everything right, and you miss one or two critical components. It can really be the weak link in your system. And so we do that for implementation. We do that for assessment. And so in this case, we were brought in to kind of apply that to the standard, and we ran it through this process. And when we start, we don't know where it's going to end up. We just break it into all its components. We score it. We have different groups working on different areas. In the end, we bring the scores together, and this is kind of the overall score that you see here. So in the light blue, it was the initial review that we did in 2019, and the results that we saw there. And that's more of a combination, not just the standard, but also the standard and any available industry guidelines, any reference documentation that we could review based on what we had at that time. Since then, just recently, we were asked to kind of do another review just to see how the state of the electric vehicle charging has changed over time, just over the past couple of years. And you can see that there was a market improvement in the technology, and that starts including available things, again, similar things. What is out there? What's available? There are some implementations using the 15118-2. We use that knowledge. We use what was publicly available there to kind of review the system. But what we saw also was that the governance and the operations did not move much. And then what you want to do is you get those into the target goals is what you're ultimately trying to reach. And how do we achieve those target goals, or what do we do to arrive at those? If we use NIST standards, best practices, we used our experience, we used DigiCert, and their expertise and experience, and together we kind of came out. This is kind of where you would like to be, and we do get customers saying, don't you want your PKI to be fully optimized or specialized? And what we say is that's where you want to get to. That's where you want to evolve to. But what you really want is a well-established system that is on the verge of being optimized, that you have some manual processes, you have some that are automated. And then once you can get to that state, as the PKI evolves, then you want to evolve it into that automated solution. And what we see with these current standards was that they kind of fell short in a lot of the places, and especially in the governance and operations. And which it wasn't a surprise in the end, because what we know is, as we mentioned earlier, that ISO, these are standards bodies, group, and so great at developing technology requirements, but really they're not set up to create governance. They really don't want to tell you how to operate your system. And so for them to, they did exactly what their mandate is to do, is develop the technology requirements, and we see that. But what we saw where we want that harmonization and those ecosystems to come in is to complete the story and work through the governance and operations and bring all three of those components closer to the target goals.
Awesome. Well said. We published a white paper on this with the result of all the findings, and you can do a quick Google search on that with DigiCert and Ianti, and you can find that white paper. We will also distribute it to all attendees for your review, and you can dive in deep. Quick polling question. Want to keep you guys engaged here. I'm curious if you could launch it. This one is around where you think most industries fail with PKI. Oscar's just talked about some of the challenges they've heard, but what is hardest for you, or where do you think industries fail most? Governance, technology, or operations? Man, everybody responded quickly on this one. Good, we'll give one more minute. Oscar, I think you did a good job convincing him that technology is not where people fail. That's right. So if we could publish those results, 50% of our attendees, dead even, responded governance, and another 50 operations. As Oscar's articulated, clearly those are the areas where we see industries overlook most commonly, and also the hardest to get right. So that's confirming for us. Oscar, do you want to just quickly touch on some of the gaps that we saw in the white paper, technology, operations, and governance?
Sure. So I'll go through these at a high level, but they're provided in detail in the white paper. I do recommend that folks want to get more detail with that, just read the white paper, and I think there's contact information for us there. Yep. If people want to continue. We definitely love talking about PKI, and we love talking about the findings. And as I mentioned earlier, when we started this review, we didn't know what we were going to find. We were just asked to do the assessment. We ran it through our methodology, and the results came out as what they came out as. And so what we found again was in that technology, for the ISO 15118-2. It's using 256-bit keys at the root level, but again, in 2014, that was probably appropriate, right? Mm-hmm. But in 2020, we would look for it to have more, to be in the kind of the 512 range for ECC key sizes. But the standard is published as is, and updates the updates to that kind of technology is happening in the dash 20, but they're not really a kind of an evolution of one spec to the other. Is kind of taking where they started, but creating different scenarios. So the backward compatibility might not be there in the dash 20 to a dash 2 implementation. And so, as we mentioned, no requirements really on the revocation, and so that was kind of one of the weaknesses on the technology side, because that's where you would expect that infrastructure to be, and so the technology kind of provided the standard protocols, algorithms, and initial, CA architecture profiles, but it still didn't complete the story on the technology side. Next slide. On the governance, we did see that one, in the standards space, there was no real requirements for the certificate policies. That was kind of pretty much left to the implementers, and which is, again, rightly so from a standards body. They really don't want to tell you how to operate, and policies are exactly telling you how to operate those. And so, but that left that big hole in that implementation. And so, again, the revocation policies were missing, and kind of just left it up to the implementers. And again, if it was going to be a single root siloed system, that would work, right? But when we see that these electric vehicle, as we saw in the polling, and as we see, as we hear and we talk to customers, it really tends to want to be a multi-root system. And when you have that, you really need that overall governing a set of requirements for your policies, for your revocation, for your operations. And when that is missing, then we would think that this system, in a multi-rooted system, would have trouble interoperating between those systems. Next slide, please. And again, similar on the operations, and we typically see this. Everybody jumps on the technology bandwagon because it's what you can go get. You can hire DigiCert, set me up a route, give me CAs, give me certs, and I'm ready to go. And then they come back and say, oh, we need that governance piece. Let's figure out how do we get. Somebody says I need a CP or certificate policy. Let's go create one. But they totally forget about the operations. And I would say 75% of PKI is in the operations side, because once you get your governance set, once you get your architecture set, then the remainder of the life cycle of that ecosystem PKI is in the operations space. How do you provide the proofing for the identity of the subscribers, right? That's going to tell you what level of assurance you can rely on these certificates. How do you provision these certificates in the field? Everybody thinks that the first issuance of a cert is great, but these could be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years certs that go into a device. The device is given to an owner or a user, and then that user is expected to upgrade those certificates in the field later, right? It's kind of left up to them. So that's kind of an unrealistic expectation. What you talked about, in that charging scenario is that seamless, right? The solution that users don't want to know that there's a certificate or a PKI involved. They just want to know that there's security and that it works. And so to provide, on the operations side. So those were the items that were missing. Again, look at the white paper. It goes into detail in all of these sections. It gives you a little bit more breakdown of the components, so you can see what we scored each. What you saw here was just kind of the overall, but the paper goes into all the subcomponents. When we do our work, those subcomponents are broken up into multiple elements, which is not in the paper, but we feel that it gives the reader a good kind of foundation as to how we arrived at our conclusion.
Absolutely. Thank you, Oscar. And I think, again, as we started the discussion today, the importance of getting these things right. It's so much easier to get it right at the beginning and plan for success than to try to, you get something stood up and you haven't architected it correctly, and all of a sudden you start running into problems because you realize you haven't thought through how to facilitate or how to handle some of the operational challenges Oscar just spoke to. And this is why it's so important to get it right. And the work that the industry is doing in different areas is so important. And we're certainly grateful that we are involved in those. But well said, Oscar. You articulated that very clearly on some of the areas where we see we need to make sure we get right. So in our concluding moments, we're going to talk just quickly about where things go from here. Oscar and I joke or laugh all the time. We see industries who come to the table sometimes where they're, locked arm in arm and they know what they need to do. They've got a clear vision and they're all aligned. It's less common than not, but it does happen. We also see industries, and more commonly we see industries where there's a lot of wrestling. Collaboration is not easy. We see finger pointing, unwillingness to work together, or just complete lack of responsiveness. And one of our messages today is the need to be open for collaboration, the need to be open to drive towards that harmonization that Oscar so eloquently talked about. Because that ingredient is so important as you're trying to get these things right. We've talked a lot about harmonization, and ultimately that's where we believe the industry needs to get. A harmonized industry across things like geographies, harmonized PKI governance model, harmonized technology, the operation protocols, and the way the PKI is managed across the multiple domains and stakeholders in the industry. The end result of good harmonization is simpler, faster, and more secure, a more secure system. And that ultimately is what all consumers want. And that's what all stakeholders in the industry want, is a good, secure, fast connection. And PKI can do that. It just needs to be done right. And it needs to be thought through from the beginning and designed in the right way. Oscar, what else would you add here?
No, I think you've said it well. I think those are the key components, and it's just, you saw the number of components or areas or elements that need to be done correctly. But when you do, and we have done it successfully, we know it's achievable, and we've done it for global systems. So this is an achievable result.
Absolutely awesome. Well, let's jump. Oscar, before we conclude, maybe you can tell our participants a little bit more about your services, just really quickly.
Sure, and I think we talked about that, through, we provide consulting services and either in assessments or in implementations. We've worked really well with DigiCert, and Yanti provides kind of the governance and operations piece, and we partner heavily with DigiCert to bring in that technology part. So we feel we cover that end-to-end solution. And sometimes we're brought in to assess PKIs that are already operational. Other times we're brought in to help design and implement and operate.
Awesome, thank you. And just for DigiCert, we are very proud of the technology that we have brought to the market in the IoT space. As I said, my team runs global deployments. We have issued billions of IoT certificates, and we're proud of the platform that we have. We have a custom-built IoT platform, and we have added features to that for the work that we're doing in the electric vehicle charging station or charging industry. The DigiCert's main platform is called DigiCert One, and underneath DigiCert One, we have a handful of different managers. IoT Device Manager is one of those, and I am confident in saying that it is the most flexible and robust PKI platform for IoT on the market today. We have the ability to do on-premise deployments, hybrid or in the cloud, flexible certificate profiles to scale up or down depending on your need. The ability not just to manage the certificates, we have very robust certificate management for things like revocation and renewal, but also we have the ability to associate a certificate with a particular device to give you device identity and device management through our platform. This platform is, as I said, tailor-built for IoT deployments, and it's working in multiple critical infrastructure industries, provisioning millions of certificates, and we're proud of the work that we've done there. And I would just say, this is kind of a view of our platform. I mentioned the other managers, IoT, or DigiCert, we provide certificates in all different use cases. Most people know DigiCert for the work that we do in the public trust website security business. Our Search Central platform is one of our flagship products. We're proud of that. But we also have a very robust, secure software manager for signing solutions to allow IoT manufacturers or enterprise to have more controls around the way they do code signing. And that's a product that is very important in IoT and also in electric vehicle. And all of these managers are housed under our single user interface, the DigiCert One platform, and we're proud of that. So thank you for letting us give a little pitch on our products. As I said at the beginning of the meeting, we are offering today as a thank you for participating a free 2-month trial with one of our technical support members to allow you to get in and test workflows, get your hands on the product, see the dashboard, see the management, the reporting capabilities. We want you to get your hands on it. There's a lot of people that are going to be adopting PKI in the next 1 to 2 years. We hope you'll take advantage of this and give us a shot. As part of that, to help you get started, we're also offering no startup costs, which would include a root and an ICA, just to help you kind of get started and get things going. We'll send a follow-up email just with details on how to take advantage of that. But we just really want to thank you. We have had almost every one of the attendees who started our call today. I just looked quickly at the number and we still have, I think we may have lost 1 or 2, but really appreciate everybody's participation. This is an important topic right now and the industry needs to get it right. I appreciate Oscar. You are such a great thought leader. You've shared some incredible insights today. Really appreciate you staying up. He's in the East Coast in America, so it's like, I don't know, 3 in the morning or something for him right now. But can't thank you enough, Oscar, for staying up and sharing your insight and wisdom. And to all of you, thank you so much for taking your time. We hope the information that we've shared today you will have found helpful. If you have any questions, we will follow up and we would be happy to have additional dialogue and discourse with you. On that note, thank you everybody for joining. We hope you've enjoyed our presentation today. We hope you have a wonderful remainder of your day. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.